Hi, everyone. This is Bill Craig, your moderator for today's webcast. We're going to be getting started here in just a couple of minutes. We're just allowing everyone to get logged in, and then we'll get started. While you wait, if you would like to access any of our upcoming or on-demand webcasts or our workshops, you can please visit us at the links you'll see at the bottom of the screen. I also chatted out those links in case you want to access them there as well. Thanks again, and we'll be starting here shortly. Hi, everyone, and thanks for joining us for today's webcast on boosting performance with JD Edwards Data Archiving. My name is Bill Craig, and I'm Senior Solutions Director with GSI, and I'll be your moderator for today's webcast. We ask that you please take a moment to review our confidentiality notice. Now for a quick overview on today's meeting, which is going to last about 60 minutes. First, we're going to take a moment to go over a couple of housekeeping items, and then I'm just going to give you a very brief company overview. Then I'm going to turn it over to our presenter for our main presentation. That's going to last about 35 to 40 minutes, and then we're going to wrap up with a question and answer session. Now, as I mentioned, we will have our question and answer session at the end of today's webcast. But if you would like to submit a question, you can do so at any time during the webcast, and you can do so using that Q&A icon located on the Zoom window, which you'll see on the screen there. So who is GSI? GSI was founded in 2004. We're a forward-thinking organization that helps companies align and optimize their digital footprints with their business goals. Our practice is based on 4 pillar areas, which you're going to see on the left-hand side of your screen there. Those include enterprise applications, cloud services, cybersecurity, and business process optimization. We have over 125 industry professionals, and we have resources worldwide, which allows us to offer a 24/7 global support model. And most importantly, we offer 100% guarantee on everything that we do. Now, I'd like to introduce our main presenter for today's webcast, David Shea. Dave is the founder of DC Software and author of ArcTools. He's also a well-known industry subject matter expert. Dave has presented at numerous JD Edwards as well as IBM conferences and has 30 plus years of IT and ERP experience. Dave has a bachelor's of science in mechanical engineering as well as an MBA. Previously, he worked at Anderson Consulting and was IT directors in big pharma, medical devices, and biotech. Dave is also a CPIM. Dave, you want to take it away? Let me stop sharing my screen and you can take it away.
Okay, here comes the big handoff now. I have to find the share button. There it is. Okay, Bill, if you can confirm when you can see that.
We can see it, Dave. Thank you.
Okay, and you can see the mouse moving around, I hope?
We can.
Okay, good. All right, so thank you again. Yep, my name's Dave Shea, and Bill, that long list you just read off makes me feel old. anyway, okay, another one of these disclaimer screens. Frankly, I like GSI's better, so I have to steal that. So here's what we're going to cover today, and I'm going to move kind of quickly. We'll do a little intro on ARC tools and how we got here and what we're doing. We'll talk about archiving. You know, why should you do it? When should you do it? How are you going to do it? We'll do an overview of ARC tools, and we'll take a peek, very brief demo at the product. So we've been around for a long time. The company was founded in the mid-90s, started on the AS400 platform, got involved with JD Edwards in the 2000 timeframe, came out with the first shrink-wrapped archiving solution for JD Edwards in 2001 with the help of the world development folks in Denver and also a bunch of big customers like WL Gore and Baxter and some others. So, and we're still here. So it's been over 20 years in the JDE space. We started on AS400 with World. Shortly thereafter, added, it was One World XE was the current version at the time. We've been doing One World E1 on the AS400 ever since. In 2005, we started with Oracle and SQL with a product for ARC tools. And then in 2018, we started with a clean sheet of paper and created a brand new version of ARC tools for Oracle and SQL Server. So we're going to see a little bit of that coming up. So the first question is, why are folks archiving? And despite the humongous storage devices we have now and SSDs and all this quick, fast equipment, system performance is still the number one reason why people are archiving. When SSDs came out, I thought my goose was cooked. But fortunately, we are piling up data at ever increasing rates. So, and it still slows down the machine because you still have to build indexes on that stuff. You still have to slog through all that stuff. So performance is still the number one reason. Next would probably be upgrades. So JD Edwards was very kind over the last 20 years as they were out there pitching upgrades to suggest strongly that as part of an upgrade project, you may want to do some archiving because, you know, it's a good time to clean house and you don't have to drag all that stuff up the hill to the next version. And the next version will run faster with less data. So migrating to the cloud or doing a database migration, say from AS400 to SQL Server or something, these are, from my perspective, they're kind of like an upgrade in that you're moving a whole bunch of stuff from one place to another. These are, the cloud business has helped us a lot because if you're going to the cloud, one of the line items on your monthly bill is going to be space. And so if you can save a terabyte in production, you're actually going to save that terabyte 5 times because it's in production, it's in PRP, it's in PY, it's in QA, it's in Sandbox. You know, you've got all these environments. So save a terabyte here and multiply by 5, and that becomes real money in the cloud scenario. Some customers have come to us because they were scared of their DR reality, how long it would take to recover. So again, less data means faster recovery. Sometimes, more than a few times actually, the legal department was the one pushing for this. They found out by the water cooler that there was 20 years of history out there in JD Edwards, and somebody remembered that there was something that happened 15 years ago that we'd rather forget. So if you destroy that data, then if a subpoena comes in, you don't have to produce it because you properly disposed of that data. So this has been helpful for our business. So, you know, lots of reasons why people are doing this. Most folks wish they had started this 10 years ago. In fact, when you get done, you'll probably really wish you started 10 years ago. But, you know, the first time, there's a lot of ticking and tying going on and testing and figuring out the sequence and getting things all lined up. And there's a lot more data in that first pass because you're going from 20 years down to merely 10 or preferably 5. But next year, it'll be a lot easier. It's already figured out. There's only a year's worth of data. And so once you get this done, it's pretty straightforward to make it an annual exercise. A couple ways to do it. JDE has some programs that they call purge programs or archiving programs. The problem is they are A, few and far between, and B, the few don't work right anyway. And in many cases, those programs that JD Edwards provides, it does more damage than help. So we'll see an example of that in a minute when we talk about accounts receivable. And we'll also talk about summarization in JD Edwards, which is another problem area. So the JDE stuff, it's not there, but that's pretty common in the packaged application business. JD Edwards and other ERP providers, they typically have something that they can call purge program. So if the question comes up in the demo, they can say yes. But the reality is it's really not what you need. Folks have tried to do this in-house, and as I learned 20 some years ago, it's a lot more complicated than it sounds. And so it turns into a huge development project, or you create something the way you think it's supposed to look, and then you find out later that it caused a lot of problems. This is why third-party solutions like our tools are here, because it's hard to figure out, and once we figured it out, it's pretty easy to roll it out to more customers. So the end result of this is don't bother trying the JD Edwards stuff because of the problems it causes. This summarization program that Denver gave you, R09811, or if we have any world customers, it would be P09811. That thing is supposed to summarize transactions in the fiscal period for GL accounts. And so you can take the 1,000 things that hit cash in February and add them up to a single debit or credit, take the 1,000 details out of there, and it sounds great on paper. But that thing caused all kinds of problems with other in other areas in JD Edwards, where it goes looking for 9/11 details, like AP inquiry. You may want to pull up the 9/11s. So don't use this thing because it causes a lot of headaches. We're going to do a different approach at summarization that we'll talk about in a minute. So don't bother doing this yourself because, again, it's a heck of a lot harder than it sounds. There are a couple general scenarios as to what the data looks like in JD Edwards and how we make a decision as to what we're going to archive or not. The simplest is called a top-down. So this is a document. In this case, let's talk about EDI, inbound sales orders. This would be the F47011, the EDI inbound sales order header, and there's a couple of child tables underneath that. You would think in JD Edwards, you could look at a header and see that a document was closed and see when it got closed. And that really ought to be all you need to know. And so you could pick that document and go ahead and archive it. In EDI, it is blissfully that simple. The problem in JD Edwards is it's rarely that easy. It is that easy in EDI, but other places, sales orders, purchase orders, and so on, it's a heck of a lot harder to figure out. In purchase orders, for example, it's still a document with a header and some details. But the decision-making process, you can't make a good decision only looking at the PO header. Yes, there's some dates up there, but there's really not a whole lot up there of interest to us. For us to make the right decision, we do what we call a bottom-up. So we look at the header because there's something up there, but we also look at all the lines, we look at all the receipts. In many cases, there are other tables and other areas. In the case of purchase orders, we would look at vouchers. And so we look at a whole bunch of different things before we ultimately decide whether or not we're going to archive PO123. So it's a more complicated scenario, obviously far more complex than the top-down. But the real bear would be payables and receivables. So this is payables, but receivables is the same thing. So here we've got a voucher. It was partially paid here. The rest was paid there. This voucher payment paid a whole bunch of other vouchers. One of those vouchers has some other payment document attached to it. So we get this many-to-many relationship going on. And so if you were thinking of archiving and you look at this picture, it may look like pretty much everything on this page is old enough and it's paid and it all looks good except for this guy because somebody voided it. And the void date was newer than whatever the horizon date is that you're shooting for. So it's obvious you don't want to archive this one. There's an archive program in JD Edwards that would look at this picture and would do this. It would take all these other things and get rid of them and leave this thing out here all by its lonesome self. And the problem with that is yesterday, this thing, the payment was sitting here next to voucher 5. And if you take away voucher 5 and leave payment 4, what you've done is you have forever broken AP by offset integrity, which is an integrity that makes sure that these things add up right and that they're in balance. So you don't want to use the JDE thing. You don't want to just look at these individual documents. They're related. So what ArcTools does is it says, okay, it's obvious I don't want to archive payment 4 because of the void date, but this thing is related to that thing. I need to keep these two together. So I'm now I will not archive voucher 5. But now that I'm not archiving this, I'm not going to archive those because they're related, or those because they are related to number 2, those because they're related to number 3, and so forth. So the right answer is I shouldn't archive any of these, and it's all because of this one thing over here. The other 10 things by themselves look like they're okay. So ArcTools will pick the right stuff. We won't archive anything until next year when the void date is older than the horizon, and then payment 4 also becomes okay archive. We'll take all of this stuff all at the same time and throw it over the fence to the archive. So it's a very difficult thing to get right. So the top downs are easy, the bottom ups are harder, the many to manys are a real bear. And then there's all kinds of unfortunate realities or idiosyncrasies that go on in JD Edwards. And most folks that have been swimming around in JD Edwards for a while will recognize the things on this list. We've seen a lot of bad data, orphan records, null values that are never supposed to be there, stuff like that. And it can come from a number of different places. Duplicate keys. World has the unfortunate situation in some areas where you can have 2 order number 1, 2, 3s. It doesn't make sense, but the world didn't do anything to prevent it. E1 has unique keys defined on all the tables because you're supposed to. And so that's not an issue in E1, but world, you can have duplicate keys, which makes life interesting. We've seen lots of orphans like PO lines that don't have headers. This is a good one where the PO number is a number because it's the PO number, except in all those places where it's not a number because in the table it's defined as an alphanumeric. And functionally, it doesn't make a whole lot of difference, but mechanically for us, ArcTools, we're in here chewing on tens of millions, hundreds of millions of rows. And these kinds of things kind of slow down the parade, and we have to do something to accommodate this. And we've got this figured out. This is a good one where most of the indexes are in this sequence, except somebody didn't get the memo because there's a handful of places where the index is in a different sequence. And again, it doesn't matter if you're pulling up an order on the screen, but when you're chewing on 50 million orders, this kind of stuff makes a difference. So we've already figured this out, and we already have this in our notes. So one of the things we do during setup is to take care of some of that stuff. This thing is a pain in the neck. I'm sure whoever designed this table was very clever, but they weren't very practical in terms of how to use things. He really should have read this memo about that. But and this is my all-time favorite. The MCU, which is the key to the business unit. The business unit is the start of all life in JD Edwards, and this thing is right justified, which is just nuts. And I asked the folks in Denver while I was out there 20 years ago and said, who thought this was a good idea? And they said, we don't really know, but the rumor is that it looked better on the report that way. So, okay. So anyway, lots of reasons why this is harder than it should be in JD Edwards. I'm going to change gears a little bit and talk about a sample client so I can demonstrate some of the potential benefits of what we're doing here. So here's a customer, E191 Oracle, running a number of different modules, financials, fixed assets, media objects. They've got a fair number of F55s, custom tables. Their production is running at almost, let's call it 2 terabytes. They've been on JD Edwards for 17 years, so they've got a lot of stuff. So they're adding 100 meg a year, roughly, according to my arithmetic. They want to archive again because of system performance and because of maintenance time. So they want to go from 17 and a half years, 5.5 years. So they've got an opportunity to archive 10 or 12 years of data here. So they've got a huge opportunity. These guys, 134 million in their FO 911. This puts them smack in the middle of the pack of what we see. We see customers with 20 million 911s. We see customers with 2 or 3 billion with a B in the 911. So it's really just amazing how much data we've piled up. But so pretty good size in the 911. We see this a lot where the vast majority of the data in the 911 comes from one place. So of their 130 million, they've got 90 million that came just from AR, followed fairly far behind by miscellaneous batches, G batches, et cetera. And then, way down the list are fixed assets and AP. So this is pretty common. We look at aging. What does the 911 look like by fiscal year? Now, these guys had used that dreaded summarization program a few years back. And so when we look at some aging of their 911, we'll see how that affected it. But they haven't summarized anything since fiscal 13. So, and they still, even though they ran summarization back here, they're still at 130 million in the 911. So again, they're shooting for current plus 5. And given their aging, that puts about 65 million rows, more than about half of their FO911 in the category of, old enough, potentially archivable.
Hey, Dave.
Yep.
Getting a little background noise from your mic. I don't know if there's any.
Yeah, the problem is there's some construction going outside.
Okay.
Unfortunately, they decided right now to start with the router.
So, they always do it, right?
Yep. So I'll try to move the mic a little closer and see if that helps. Is this any better?
Keep talking.
Okay. So anyway,
okay.
We look at the row counts in the tables, and for these guys, we see the 911 is the biggest, and you see how quickly the row counts drop by functional area. So AR is pretty close behind. If you add these two together, you're in the neighborhood or a little more in the 911, and you drop on down the list. And by the time you get to the bottom of the top 10, you're at less than 10% of the biggest single table. So this is something you see a lot. So we take the row count information and we take the batch count information and we take some other realities in terms of prerequisites and co-requisites and figure out what the sequence or what the project would look like. So for this customer, we would likely proceed in the following sequence. We'll do receivables, payables, fixed assets, GL, media objects, some custom tables, and then we'll summarize the archived FO911. So here's what their aging looked like in the 911. We've got, they've got whatever, 17, 18 years of data. You can see here suddenly it's 15 million. And prior to that, it's a million or less. So these are the fiscal years that they have already summarized. And they piled up all that data since then. What we look at is they wanted to go to current plus 5. So current plus 5 puts roughly half of their FO911 in the old enough category. And when we start working with a customer, we like to open with what's the time frame look like for us to get half, because half is good for performance reasons. And I'll show you some examples of that coming up. So for these guys, fortunately, their current plus 5, their desire for current plus 5 puts them in the 50% category. So customers ask us, okay, you keep telling me I'm going to go faster if I archive some data. That's great. How much faster am I going to go? And this is one of the many places where the accurate answer is, well, that depends. And it depends on lots of things. But if you're going into a sales order inquiry screen, it's probably not going to make much difference because you're pulling up an order number by key. If you're running an AR aging, it could make a huge difference because it's chewing on less data. One place that's repeatable, that's easy to test, is to, hey, how long does it take to build an index? So we did some testing at a customer. We started with about 40 million in the 911 and rebuilt a couple of indexes, and you can see how long it took. We'll call it an hour. So then we did some archiving. We went from 40 million in the 911 to under 20 million in the 911. We rebuilt the same indexes, and look what happened. It went from an hour to 7 minutes. So, 6 times faster. Now, some people will say, well, I don't rebuild these indexes very often. What do I care about that? And I think the reason you care about that is as you're moving around in JD Edwards and it's executing SQL statements on the server to answer your questions, the box, the database, may be creating temporary indexes to answer your question. And so this kind of an effect will show up in lots of places in JD Edwards. So this is just one way to attempt to quantify how much faster. So I mentioned this before. How do we decide the scope and the sequence of a project? We look at the row counts, we look at the batch counts, we consider the prerequisites and the co-requisites. And so if we're looking at row counts, we would come down to, well, let's do GL, let's do AR, let's do media objects, let's do custom tables. If we're looking at batch types in the GL, we'd say, let's do AR, miscellaneous batch types, then AP, then fixed assets. We combine all of these into, this would be the overall project if we want to go across all the functional areas that have any, have enough data to be concerned at all about. We would do AR, AP, fixed assets, inventory, a bunch of modules in the GL, and then summarize the archive 911 and CARTA. But these guys, because the bulk of their 911 comes from AR, and because AR is so much bigger than the other areas in its row counts, these guys could be an opportunity for doing a smaller project. Let's go after AR. Let's go after the GL for AR because that's the vast majority of the general ledger. And let's go after the miscellaneous batches because they're pretty big too. And then we'll do the summarization. So we could do a full project or we could do a smaller scope project and maybe come back later and do the rest of these. So a little bit about ArcTools. It's very straightforward. It's a quick installation. We need, if you're on AS400, we install a couple of libraries on the AS400 and we're off and running. If you're on Oracle and SQL, we need a Windows desktop. We're going to install some software on that desktop. We're going to load up some SQL scripts on that desktop that we would run in either SQL Management Studio or SQL Developer or something like that. So it's very simple to install. It's very flexible. We'll see some of that coming up. We can tweak things, add tables, add logic. This is very important. We are not built in the JDE toolset. I know there are other tools out there that are built in the JDE toolset, and they look like JD Edwards. So that's good because it looks comfortable. But the problem with that is I would be a UBE. And we are talking about millions or hundreds of millions or billions of rows. And a UBE is not the way you want to be processing hundreds of millions of rows. So for Oracle and SQL, the user interface is in Visual Studio, so it's a pretty straightforward Windows application. If you're on AS400, it's native RPG. The analysis uses SQL scripts. They're structured in a very simple, straightforward manner, so you can easily see what they're doing. You don't have to be a SQL expert to understand what's going on. When we execute the archive, we're doing the inserts to the archive and the deletes from production. That process, the archive engine, is going to use a proprietary code generator to create an executable that runs on the server in the native language of the box. So again, AS400, it's RPG. Oracle, it's PLSQL. Microsoft SQL Server, it's T-SQL. So it's going to run on the server in the native language of the box, which is how we get such good performance. And we'll see some examples of that. We can control the execution, which means we can tell it when to start. We can tell it if it needs to stop at a certain time. We can force it to slow down if we need to. Now, we don't often have to do that, but if your replication plumbing is already stressed from the daily grind, and I come along and throw another 20 million rows an hour at it, you may want to slow it down. So we can control it. So if you want to. And this is not just for JDE. We deliver a comprehensive application for JD Edwards. It covers a whole bunch of functional areas in the software, but you can point ArcTools at other stuff on your server. So if you have other things that need cleaning out, whether it's sales tax or shop floor data collection or whatever it is, you have a tool that you can use to go after that stuff. We have to get two things right in order to survive this archiving process. We need to pick the right stuff. And as we saw picking the right stuff in JD Edwards isn't as easy as it sounds. But we've taken that complicated process, especially the one for receivables and payables, and distilled it down into a simple approach so that you can see what it's doing. You don't have to be a SQL expert. If you are a SQL expert, you may look at some of these processes and kind of chuckle at how simple they are. But we do that for a reason. One, because it's easier for the humans, especially the humans that aren't SQL experts, to look at it, figure it out, and understand how to tweak it if they need to. And it's also easier for the box to process it. So we have this simple approach. It's effective because of the simplicity and because we can do whatever we need to get the answer right. Remember, there are some crazy things going on in JD Edwards that require numbers and alphas and right justifieds and orphans and all of this stuff. So we can do whatever we need to come up with the right answer because the theory applies about 85% of the time, and the other stuff you have to be able to accommodate. So we pick the right stuff. And the other thing we have to do then is once we've decided which POs are we going to archive, which GL batches are we going to archive, we need to move a trainload of stuff from production to the archive. So if you were to go to your DBA on Tuesday and say, hey, Bill, on Thursday, we're going to archive 50 million rows from the FO911. We're going to take 50 million rows from production, and we're going to insert them over into that table over at the archive, and we're going to come back and we're going to delete them from production. What do you think about that? Your DBA will start sweating because if you do that wrong, you can really cause the phone to ring in the computer room, or worse, you can croak the server if you do it the wrong way. So we don't do it the wrong way. We do it the right way. We do it very methodically. The DBAs tend to love us because we do it the right way. We do lots of things like database commits in places that we're supposed to. This is critical. We have never seen blocking or row locking issues with our tools. So, and that's key. It's easy to customize. If you've got an F55 4311 that goes along with your purchase order, it'll take you about 30 seconds to add it. The vanilla PO purge spec set tool. If you've got some logic you want reflected in the selection process based on your F55 4311, again, it's very straightforward to tweak the driver process. You can tell it when to start. You can tell it if it has to get out of the way on Sunday afternoon or something. We talked about the throttle. You can force it to slow down. So you can run this during the day without worrying too much, because if it does seem to be causing something to be backed up because it's running too fast, you can just come in and force it to slow down. And we can run on different servers. In Oracle or SQL Server, you can run the job on the source server where the production data lives, or you can run it on the archive server if you want. Sometimes there are reasons why you'd rather do that. You can even run it on a third server if you wanted to. So a lot of flexibility there. I'm going to move the data, the same table, in a different place. And that place, forgive me because there's lots of terminology differences between AS400, Oracle, and SQL. I'm going to archive the PO headers from the F4301 in prod DTA on server A. And I'm going to archive them. I could put them in prod arc on server A. I could put them in prod arc on server B. So they can be in a different database, they could be in a different server, but it's going to be in the 4301. So you know where it is. We won't re-platform the data. I'm not going to take your Oracle data and store it in SQL Server. I'm sure there are lots of gadgets out there you can do things like that. I'm going to take it from here and I'm going to put it over there. We are doing the hard part. We are picking the right stuff and we are getting it out of the production database without killing the server. Here are some sample throughputs. So this happens to be SQL Server. These guys, E191, this is their production. You can see the throughputs for the various modules. Obviously, this one's my favorite, 12 million an hour. There's another customer in their DB environment, sales orders. We were getting 28 million rows an hour. You will never see this kind of throughput in a UBE. So this thing really can fly. This was a good one. We ran purchase orders and work orders at the same time. Over the course of about 30 minutes, they were netting 19 million rows an hour. And this is probably a dozen or more, maybe 20 tables. This is probably 5 or 10, I don't remember. But so we're getting a lot of work done in a short period of time. This is one of my favorite slides. So we like to make sure that when we're running, we're not causing any unfortunate things to happen on the server. So during the testing, this is an Oracle shop, we were running 4 jobs at the same time. Sales orders is probably a dozen tables. AR invoices is 1 or 2. AR receipts is 2 or 3. GL is a couple of tables. So across of these 4 jobs, we were archiving 17 tables. In the course of a half an hour, the throughput was about 10 million rows an hour. And so I pinged the DBA and said, hey, can you get your crystal ball and take a look? Is there smoke coming out of the server, or is it complaining, or what? And the DBA said, no, it looks fine. So this is great. This is exactly what we want. We want to get a heck of a lot of work done in a short period of time, and we don't want people or servers freaking out during the process. People ask how you can access the archive data when you're done. I won't go through all the details on here, but there are several ways to do this, ranging from OCM maps to full copies of environments. And so there are slick ways to do it. There are brute force ways to do it, and we can help you. And GSI is obviously very good at this too, because they've been doing this kind of stuff for a long time. So we've been doing this 20 plus years, hundreds of customers. Given that we've been doing this for 20 years and we're still doing it this way, it's safe to say the methodology is solid. We can run at millions of rows an hour without killing the box. So I'm going to walk you through some screens and show you what Oracle SQL looks like. If you're on AS400, it looks different because it's RPG, but the approach is the same. So here we are in a SQL Server shop. We have a number of different functional areas where we're providing these scripts to get this job done. This is SQL Management Studio, where we've got one of those scripts loaded up. This is the PO driver script. And there's a number of work tables that we're using through this process. This is all very methodical. I've got a list of all the POs that I build by looking in lots of places, not just the PO header. We look in the header, the lines, the receipts, the ledger. I build a list of POs that I don't want to archive for one reason or another. There could be 2 reasons, there could be 10 reasons. But this table, we're building a list of POs we don't want to archive. This is a summary by PO number of why don't we want to archive PO 123 or PO 125. This is a summary of the grand total number of POs and how many POs we don't want to archive because of the header or because of the receipt or because of vouchers. And then this is what we're shooting for. This is the brass ring. This is the driver table for purchase orders. This has PO numbers that we want to archive. So here you can see what the structure of the SQL looks like. Again, very simple. If you're a SQL expert, you might chuckle at this, but if you're not a SQL expert, you will appreciate that you don't have to look at this too long before you can see what it's doing. And if you want to tweak it, it's pretty simple. If you need to add some other criterion as to why you don't want to archive a PO, this is where you would do that. Now we're in the desktop for running the archives themselves. This is, we call them spec sets. So we have spec sets for a whole bunch of different functional areas. I'm going to take you through some of the setup for a purchase order. So the purchase order, there's my PO X51. That's the driver table with all the PO numbers that we want to archive. We have a list of all the tables related to the purchase order that we want to archive using these PO numbers. Here we've got the joins on the driver table to the PO line in this case. Let me just stress that you're not setting this up. This is provided to you. But if you have an F55 4311, you would set up a new line that looks just like this one. So here we set up all the headers and details that are connected to the purchase order. Here's a screen where we run it. So it defaults to choosing all of the tables. You can deselect some if you like. Don't know that you need to do that. You can override where it's pulling the table from. So if your PO ledger lives somewhere else besides the standard location, you can override it. If you wanted to archive your PO ledger somewhere else than the default, you can override that. Again, not likely, but you can if you want to. Tell it when you need it to start, Saturday at 2 a.m. Tell it when you want it to stop, Sunday at 4 p.m. because the operations folks are going to take the server offline for maintenance, tinkering. These two, I won't get into the details, but these two comprise that throttle feature I was talking about. So you can change these two settings to force a job to slow down. This is where you would tell it what server you want to run this job on. It's going to default to running wherever the tables live. But if for some reason you want to run it on the archive box, you can do that. So that's about as quick as I can go through that material. So I apologize for the noise in the background, but I'm going to hand it back. I need to stop sharing here. I'll hand it back to Bill.
Thank you, Dave. Appreciate that. Actually, I think I only heard the background noise for about 5 minutes, and then it.
Okay, good. Yeah, they were really going nuts with the router out there. So.
It always happens, like you say, right when you're in the middle of a webcast.
Yep.
Okay, can you see my screen?
Yes.
Perfect. Okay, well, let's continue. Thanks, Dave, again for the presentation today. Before we get into our questions and answers, I did have a few follow-up items, and then, of course, we'll get into the Q&A. I did chat out to you a link for a survey to our webcast today. And I ask you if you can click on that link. We really would appreciate any feedback you can give us on the webcast today. It helps us improve our webcast in the future. So we're just going to take a moment. If you can click on that link, you'll see in your Zoom menu bar, you'll see the chat there. If you click on that, you'll be able to access that link. And if you could fill out that would be fantastic. Okay, let's keep on going here. I did want to mention, if you'd like to set up a complimentary consultation or deep dive demo of ARC tools or how GSI might be able to help with any of your JD Edwards needs, you can reach out to me via my contact information you'll see on the screen here. I also chatted that out to you as well, and there's a link if you'd like to just fill out a contact us form. I did want to mention that GSI provides extensive free educational resources. Obviously, our educational webcasts that we hold several throughout the course of the month. We do have monthly newsletters under our various platform areas. Lots of great content out there on YouTube. We do participate in all the major events. Obviously, In Focus is next week. I think we're doing 5 sessions at In Focus. We do participate in all the regional user group meetings as well. And then we do have our virtual workshops, which I mentioned at the beginning of our webcast today. If you'd like to stay connected with us on our social media channels, you'll see those listed there. But without further ado, let's get into our questions and answers. And I see we've already had several questions submitted online, but would like to remind everyone, if you would like to submit a question, you can do so through that Q&A icon, which you'll see on the screen there, and that's in the Zoom menu. Okay, Dave, are you ready?
Yep.
Okay, our first question comes in from Kara, and Kara asked, how do you manage custom tables, F55s, or custom documents, such as several F55 that have their own header detail document?
Yep. All right. Good question. So the simplest is, I think I mentioned it in the presentation, an example where you've got a custom table to add to an existing document. So if we see an F55 4311, I think we all kind of know where that belongs. It's part of the PO. We're going to add that into the spec set in ARC tools to be archived along with the other 15 or 20 tables in the PO. So those are easy. The next level would be if that F55 4311 has some information on it that you want used in the selection criteria for the archive of a PO. In that case, we would tweak that script that you saw, that we might either add another little block in there that looks at the F55. We'd like to run these things as, tell me how you decide not to archive a PO. because it's a heck of a lot easier to figure out what you don't want to purge than it is to figure out what you do want to purge. So your criteria on the F554311, maybe there's a flag or something, you set that up and we're good to go. So it's very straightforward. If it's an entire document, if there's something that looks like a PO with headers and details, you have lots of predefined sample calculations to clone. So we would likely take one of those driver scripts and clone it for your custom document and create an archive spec set that looks like PO. It's going to have headers and details. So it's pretty straightforward.
Hey, thanks, Karen. Thanks, Dave. Our next question comes in from Mohit, and the question is, do you have something similar for data mapping and migration between two Oracle databases?
Oh, data mapping and migration. I mean, like a conversion type thing going from product A to product B? I would say no. We are looking to clean out data from JD Edwards, but you could also use it pointed at some other database. If you wanted to create some archive functionality in some other database, you can do that with ArcTools. We don't have it predefined necessarily, but again, you've got lots of sample calculations in JD Edwards.
Okay, thanks, Mohit. And Dave, our next question comes from Antonio, and Antonio asks, can you use ArcTools for data outside of JDE?
Yes, in fact, yeah. Yep. So I have an example set up in SQL Server where we created some archive functionality for, I forget the name of it. SQL Server gives you this little database to play with. But yes, and we did that just to show that it can be done, but obviously that's not a big example. But customers have used it to go after their own stuff in other databases.
Okay. Dave, Antonio, thank you. Our next question comes in from Tiffany, and the question is, millions of rows an hour is great, but what if that's too fast and my replication is getting bogged down?
Yep, that's the throttle thing. So 20 years ago on AS400, we created the throttle because it was the index maintenance on the FO911 was killing the box. So Cargill had, I don't know, 60 or 80 indexes on their humongous FO911. And so we had to slow it down so that we didn't screw up everything else that was going on in the box. Index maintenance has come a long way in the last 20 years, so that doesn't seem to be the issue anymore. But replication definitely is, because the pipe between your production box and the failover box and the salt mine out in Utah someplace, that pipe is only so big. So if that pipe gets backed up and the replica is an hour behind production, if God forbid you get struck by lightning, you've lost an hour. And so we don't want to do that. So you have the ability to force it to slow down, and you can change it while it's running. So you can slow it down at 8 o'clock in the morning when people come into work, and you can speed it up at 6 o'clock at night when people are gone. So you can do that as well.
Okay, thanks, Dave, and thanks, Tiffany, for your question today. And that does appear to be the end of our questions. So thanks again, Dave, and everyone for your questions today. I did want to mention again that if you would like to set up a complimentary consultation or demo of ArcTools or how GSI can help address any of your JDE needs, you can reach out to me via my contact info there. I also chatted that out to you as well. Before we wrap up, Dave, any closing comments?
No, just thanks everybody for taking the time. And if you are coming to In Focus, please look for us. We'll have a booth and we'll have a raffle and all that fun stuff. So happy to share a free beer with you in the vendor in the happy hour. So looking forward to seeing folks there.
Thanks, Dave, and thanks everyone. Have a great day.